Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event on promoting equitable gender norms to foster democratic resilience. We're coming to you from Georgetown University in Washington, and a special welcome to those of you who are gathered here, as well as the several thousand who are joining us virtually. I'm Elaine Verveer, and I direct the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. We've come together just days ahead of the second Summit on Democracy that will be taking place with leaders from government, civil society, and the private sector around the globe to strengthen democracy. And one of the critical ways to strengthen democracy is through inclusion, through full participation that leaves no one out. We're co-hosting this event with the leaders of the cohort on gender equality as a prerequisite for democracy. And that is the governments of Sweden and Romania and the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, IDEA. As the cohort's guiding principle states, gender equality is an imperative for thriving democracies. And any effort to build strong democracies and inclusive institutions will be flawed if it excludes and marginalizes half the population. Indeed, democracy without the full participation of women is a contradiction in terms. As our own institute's research shows, countries where women prosper also tend to be healthier democracies, as empowering women and safeguarding democracy go hand in hand. We are also seeing a pushback, unfortunately, in gender equality and women's rights to participate in public life by the same forces that are pushing back on democracy. So this is a critical moment to strengthen something we all cherish, to strengthen democracy, to advance gender equality. We will hear from a distinguished group of speakers, including firsthand accounts today from Ukraine and Tunisia. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the leads of the cohort who have worked diligently for months, and I know this firsthand. This has been an all-hands-on-deck, lengthy process. From Sweden, Ambassador Sofia Kaltorp, Oscar Berger, Peter Kvist, and Alexandra Bro. From Romania, Dragos Hota. From IDEA, Rumbidzai Kandavasvika Hunda. And Jessica Smith from our own institute. We are also grateful to many governments, NGOs, and private sector representatives who've also been participating in this cohort. And I want to recognize officials from the White House, the State Department, and USAID who are here with us, and Jennifer Klein, the head of the White House Gender Policy Council and assistant to the president. She has her own fan club, and I'm a big part of that fan club. It is now my special honor to introduce the Honorable Douglas Emhoff, the Second Gentleman of the United States. As you all know, I think, he's married to the Vice President Harris, which makes him the first ever second gentleman in the United States history. So you're in the history books for a lot of reasons. He's a champion for gender equality, has traveled around the world to discuss the importance of equity in the workplace, equal pay, protecting reproductive rights, and health care. He's been a lawyer, he continues to be a lawyer, but he served in private practice for years. And I'm very happy to say that in addition to his public duties, he is on the faculty of the Georgetown University Law Center. So maybe welcome back. So please, please welcome the Second Gentleman of the United States.
Thank you, Ambassador Verveer, who I've known for a long time. Thank you for your entire career, which you have spent fighting to ensure that gender equality and women's rights are fully integrated into United States foreign policy. And because of that, Ambassador, you have made the world a better place. So thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's great to be here. It's wonderful to join you in this amazing library here at Georgetown, and it's so great to be here ahead of the second Summit for Democracy. The summit is an opportunity to show that democracy is the best way to address the world's most pressing challenges, and it's the best way to deliver for all citizens. Women's rights and women's participation are essential to democracy. But as we know, and as the ambassador said, women's rights are under attack around the world. Women's rights are under attack in Iran, where we're seeing a brutal crackdown on peaceful protesters. This includes women and even girls who are demanding just equal rights and basic human dignity. Women's rights are under attack in Afghanistan. The Taliban has barred women and girls from attending secondary schools and universities and from pursuing employment. Women's rights are under attack in Russia. Russia has committed crimes against humanity. We continue to see horrific reports of conflict-related sexual violence against women. And let's be clear, and let's be honest, women's rights are also under attack here in the United States. Across our country, various states are putting laws into place that restrict women's access to abortion and reproductive health care. And as a result, women's very lives, their very lives are at risk. The government should not interfere with any American's personal decisions about their own body. This issue is about personal freedom. My wife, the Vice President, has hosted more than 40 different convenings all around the country on reproductive freedom. She's met with doctors, community leaders, legislators, students to fight back against the extreme and horrendous consequences of the Dobbs decision. She has led the administration's response to defend reproductive rights. And our administration is pushing back. We're going to fight back against these extreme laws. We're working to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade at the federal level. And we're doing everything we can by executive action to protect women and women's health. And our administration, and let's be clear, our administration is going to continue to push back against anyone who is trying to limit and restrict a person's fundamental rights. And that includes all fundamental rights. As Ambassador said, when we consider the status of women, it's connected to so many different issues, including our very democracy. Democracies cannot succeed without the full and complete participation of all of its citizens, including women. The empowerment of women it's about an investment in our future, the future of our country and countries all around the world. When you lift up women, you lift up the status of families and communities, and everyone benefits when you lift up women. This is true politically, but it's especially true economically. Women must have access to paid family and medical leave. Women must have access to childcare. And we need more women in leadership, right? And I'm not talking just in government. We need more leaders here in education, in our military, and in business. We need more women in leadership. And there's this misconception that I've seen and I've heard that's just not true. There's this misconception that if women are succeeding, it's somehow at the detriment of men. That is not true. It's not an either or. When women succeed, we all succeed. We're all lifted up for the better. And advancing the status of women and girls takes all of us, including men and boys. We need to be allies. There's power in allyship. President Biden and Vice President Harris have made it clear that renewing democracy in the United States and around the world is essential to meeting these unprecedented challenges of our times. I'll be traveling with the Vice President, my wife. It's still so great to say that. Tomorrow, we're going to Africa. We're going to meet with government and community leaders in Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia. And during this trip, we will emphasize the importance of strengthening our partnerships and working together to advance our shared goals. Because we know that when the United States leads, the world follows. So we need to be strong here so the rest of the world will see that and follow our lead. And that includes leading on gender equality. And what does that leadership mean? Well, I'm proud to preview for next week. I'm previewing 2 announcements on behalf of the Biden-Harris administration that will be made next week at the Summit for Democracy. First, our very good friends at USAID, who I work with a lot, launching the Advancing Women's and Girls Civic and Political Leadership Initiative. It is a good one. Through this initiative, USAID will provide an initial $15 million to scale the United States support for women's political empowerment. This initiative will launch in 8 initial focus countries: Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, Tanzania, Colombia, Ecuador, Honduras, Kyrgyz Republic, and Yemen. The initiative targets individual, structural, and socio-cultural barriers to the political empowerment of women and girls, including, and this is important, preventing and mitigating violence against women in politics and in public life, while simultaneously seeking to empower women and girls to fully exercise their political and civic rights. So this is a great one. Thank you for doing that, or will be doing that. Yet there's more. USAID will also launch a network for gender-inclusive democracy. This is going to be great. This network will carry forward the important work of the Summit's gender cohort and provides a platform that allows for coordination and knowledge sharing at the country and multilateral levels. So this is a continuation of what's been already happening. The Biden-Harris administration believes that full participation of women is critical to the functioning and success of democracies across the globe. Under the leadership of President Biden and Vice President Harris, we will continue to demonstrate how transparent, accountable governance remains the best way to deliver prosperity, peace, and justice. So thank you, Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, and International IDEA, along with the governments of Sweden and Romania, and the entire gender cohort for hosting today's event. The United States looks forward to working with our friends and allies and our partners all across the world to advance gender equality and democracy. Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Emhoff, for that very timely and important message, and thank you for being with us. I'm now pleased to introduce Sweden's Minister of Foreign Affairs His Excellency Tobias Billström, who will give us an overview of Sweden's leadership in the cohort. Minister Billström previously served as group leader of the moderate party in the Riksdag, as his party's first deputy speaker, and as Sweden's Minister for Migration and Asylum Policy and Employment. Please, at the screen.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I wish I could be with you in person at Georgetown University for this important event on promoting equitable gender norms to foster democratic resilience. But since scheduling wouldn't allow it, I want to at least convey my strong support and share a few thoughts on two topics of great importance to the Swedish government: gender equality and democracy. The past decade, authoritarian leaders and populist movements around the world have taken brazen steps to undermine democracy. At the same time, we have witnessed an unparalleled rollback of women's autonomy and empowerment. This is not a coincidence. The connection between gender equality and democracy is clear. Countries where women's and girls' enjoyment of human rights are secured tend to be strong democracies. Conversely, democratic countries also tend to be more gender equal. Simply put, empowering women and safeguarding democracy go hand in hand. The two can't be separated. Ladies and gentlemen, during the Summit for Democracy's Year of Action, the cohort co-led by Sweden has explored just how gender equality and democracy are intertwined. A central conclusion is that one must look beyond the obvious, such as equal representation in parliaments. For women and girls to play a full part in our democracies, and for our democracies to reach their full potential, we need to address structural issues preventing women from equal and meaningful participation. Sweden is often portrayed as a beacon of gender equality. It does not happen by itself. It is largely the result of political will together with hard work from a strong and courageous civil society. Swedish women only won the right to vote 103 years ago. But it is often policies providing economic empowerment, such as access to affordable childcare and individual taxation, that has paved the way for greater inclusion and participation of women and girls. Women's economic empowerment is not only a critical tool for individual freedom, but also essential for governments who want to utilize it, 100 rather than 50% of their potential workforce. The commitment of men and boys has also been instrumental. Ladies and gentlemen, democracy, human rights, and gender equality are key priorities for me and for my government in Sweden's foreign policy. Contrary to what is sometimes claimed, neither gender equality nor democracy are inherent Western phenomena. The equal value of every individual, regardless of sex, gender identity or expression, ethnicity, religion, disability, sexual orientation, age, or other status, is ultimately a matter of freedom. This is easily illustrated by the world around us. Excluding Afghan girls and women from education and work is a clear violation of our basic human and therefore also democratic rights. Similarly, Russia's unjust and unprovoked aggression against Ukraine is not only a war against a sovereign European state, it is a war on the women and girls exposed to horrific acts of sexual violence. And in the long run, it is a war on freedom and democracy. To conclude, it is my hope that the recommendations presented by the gender cohort today will inspire not only reflection, but also action. Given the growing opposition against gender equality and democracy, we must stand united as we continue our work. Thank you.
Well, we're so grateful to the Swedish Foreign Minister and for Sweden's leadership in this effort. I'm now pleased to turn to the other country co-lead of the cohort, His Excellency Andrei Muraru, the Ambassador of Romania to the United States, is with us, and he will introduce their Minister of Foreign Affairs. So welcome, Mr. Ambassador. Come on up, and We'll be delighted to hear from you.
Distinguished guests, dear friends, good morning everyone, and thank you all for being here, and thank you for the excellent cooperation that we had during this past months of this intense work to organize this event and other events that are coming in the coming days. We are delighted that today we are able to showcase our deliverables and to reaffirm the importance of gender equality as a sine qua non for robust democracies. Distinguished guests, it is a privilege to join my fellow speakers. You are all true champions in promoting gender equality and supporting women's empowerment. Today's topic of debate, promoting equitable gender norms to foster democratic resilience, is more important than ever, especially when talking about establishing an affirmative role for democracies. Women are an emerging economic and political force in today's globalized world that decision makers cannot afford to ignore. Women throughout the world become increasingly aware that they can work towards improving the quality of their lives and that of their families and communities by reaching for political leadership or becoming involved in public activities. At the same time, we can see that non-governmental organizations acting in this field are increasingly more numerous and more active. Similar to many countries, Romania had to overcome cultural and social challenges on gender roles and the responsibilities of men and women. A lot of progress has been done, but yet still a lot remains to do, especially in the current international context affected by so many crises. Romania is committed to continuing to work to foster gender equality and to fulfill the commitments that we made at the first Summit for Democracy. Because there can be no strong democracy in places where gender discrimination persists, where women are still struggling to make their voice heard. That's why promoting gender equality through effective social, economic and political empowerment of women is one of Romania's priorities, including during our current mandate at the Human Rights Council. You will find more details about Romania's support to women empowerment in the next video message. Distinguished guests, it is my honor to introduce to you His Excellency Bogdan Aurescu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to address the distinguished audience of this very important event. Fostering democratic resilience may be the most important current challenge, with many different facets: equality, human dignity, freedom, tolerance, and security. All of these are key so that our societies are fair, inclusive, and resilient. The future of democracy depends largely on how well we can build resilient as well as efficient democratic societies, capable to address all challenges and crises we are confronted with, without sacrificing the rights and well-being of any group. Women are still prevented to exercise many rights, such as freely and effectively voting or running for political office. Such fundamental rights should be enforced and protected. The process of building democracy will not be complete as long as there are important parts of the population prevented from participating as policymakers and shapers before being direct beneficiaries. From this perspective, we continue to witness pushbacks and backsliding across the world. The need for the international community to address this issue in a comprehensive manner is as urgent as ever, involving all stakeholders from all geographic regions and social strata, state actors, as well as civil society and economic sector. In this regard, the study undertaken by the cohort on gender equality as a prerequisite for democracy, led by Sweden, Romania, Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, and IDEA International, aims at addressing this issue by identifying the main problems and issuing recommendations by proposing actions and a roadmap on how to implement all these recommendations. The drafting of this study would not have been possible without the valuable input of all members of the cohort. The promotion of women's leadership and equal access to decision-making is not an easy process. It requires changes in many areas, not only at the legislative level, but also at the levels of mentalities, of social and cultural norms and practices affecting both women and men. At the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania, we try to lead by example. Almost 50% of all diplomatic staff are women, and 48% of the leadership positions within the ministry's headquarters are held by women. Moreover, 35% of our missions abroad are led by women, and we aim to increase this share. However, such results are sometimes difficult to achieve, as women are often not taught to be fully aware of their potential and of the importance of the role they could and should play in the society. Empowering women is also of paramount importance, including from the economic point of view. The World Bank and other organizations have shown that increasing and broadening women's access to quality education, decent jobs, land, and other resources have contributed to sustainable development, as well as long-term prosperity for the entire society. Furthermore, there is a need to step up our efforts aimed at reaching commitments assumed with the 2030 agenda related to its gender-related aspects, especially its Sustainable Development Goal 5. Ladies and gentlemen, education plays an essential role in this equation. Empowering young women and girls in order to reach their full potential and claim their rightful place in the society is key. During the last years, a campaign has been conducted by the Romanian government with the aim of raising awareness among teenagers regarding the negative impact of gender stereotypes, especially with respect to persons with disabilities. The results were quite substantial, as hundreds of high school students at the national level, under the supervision of their teachers, have conducted their own campaigns within their high schools, aiming at reducing gender-based discrimination and violence against women and girls with disabilities. The President of Romania, Mr. Klaus Iohannis, has been involved in the He for She campaign since its very beginning, and has been one of the 10 heads of state or government participating in this very important campaign. Romania contributed to the He for She movement with an integrated vision of promoting equal opportunities and treatment between women and men. Since then, Romania has taken important steps regarding the commitments made on that occasion. The establishment of the gender equality experts through legislative reforms has been key to support the implementation of local and national strategies to address gender inequalities as well as to prevent and combat domestic violence. This newly created role has a widely positive impact on the Romanian society by counteracting direct and indirect gender-based discrimination. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to stand by our commitments to continue at national level and within regional and international fora, promoting women's rights and equal participation in all spheres of the society as a contribution to consolidating democratic values and resilient societies. Special attention should be paid to the development during all phases of conflict with regard to respecting women's rights. Armed conflicts affect women disproportionately, and sexual violence has already led to displacement in Somalia or Myanmar. Using sexual violence as a tactic of war or terrorism is appalling. It is inexcusable whether we consider the documented cases of sexual violence by violent extremist groups in Mali, Nigeria, or Syria, or the numerous reports of conflict-related sexual violence committed by the Russian soldiers in Ukraine. We should strengthen our efforts to hold those responsible for war crimes, including for conflict-related sexual violence, accountable. I do believe that this event should serve as a basis for a reflection process on how we could make use of our experiences to better promote rights and liberties for generations to come. Thank you.
So we thank the Romanian Foreign Minister, the Ambassador, and all of the staff in Romania who've been working on the cohort. We're now going to turn to our civil society representative and hear from Dr. Kevin Casas Zamora. He's the Secretary General of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, IDEA. He previously served as Costa Rica's second vice president and minister for national planning. He is coming to us today from Sweden. It seems all roads lead to Sweden. But IDEA has been extremely instrumental in this process in the cohort, and we're so happy to have them with us today as civil society leads. Please, Dr. Casasamar.
Hello, and thank you very much for the invitation to join you today. I am very glad to be with you for this event, even if virtually. I'm Kevin Casasamora, and I'm the Secretary General of International IDEA, an intergovernmental organization with 34 member states from all regions and a mandate to support democracy globally. Ever since International IDEA was founded in 1995, gender equality has been central to our understanding of what makes democracy sustainable, inclusive, and real. We advance gender equality and women's empowerment objectives across our work, for example, by analyzing and promoting the benefits of gender quotas for elected legislatures. And in the past Summit for Democracy Year of Action, we have been honored to serve as the Secretariat and co-lead of the cohort on gender equality. In my remarks today, I want to do two things. First, I will highlight the work of the gender equality cohort so far. And second, I have a call to action, which encourages us to leverage the cohort to accelerate positive change for both gender equality and democracy. The mandate of the gender equality cohort has been to reinvigorate and advance gender equality and women's empowerment in the global democracy agenda and within the Summit for Democracy. This work has focused on three pillars: inclusion, legislative and policy frameworks, and conflict prevention, peace, and security. In addition to mobilizing the perspectives and expertise of over 100 members, the cohort has convened a series of global consultations and forums. It has produced a statement of recommendations and a roadmap for governments and civil society to safeguard democracy by promoting gender equality and women's empowerment in all spheres of life. And within the summit process, the cohort is advocating and supporting a gender equality perspective in this year's regional summits. Throughout the year of action, the cohort has been guided by a truth we all know, that the achievement of gender equality remains very much a work in progress, requiring daily efforts by all of society and by all of us in parliaments and town halls, in office boardrooms and online forums, in our public acts and our private lives. We are still a long way from equality. According to UN Women, at the current rate of progress, it will take 40 years to reach gender parity between women and men in national parliaments. It will take 140 years for women to achieve equal representation in leadership positions in the workplace. And it will take an astonishing 286 years to close gaps in legal protection and remove discriminatory laws. I refuse to wait until my 14-year-old daughter is the age I am now before we even begin to see real political equality. I refuse to accept that progress must be so slow. It must not. It must not, among other reasons, because gender equality is a fundamental cornerstone of democracy. As US Vice President Kamala Harris said, and I quote here, "The status of democracy depends fundamentally on the empowerment of women," end quote. Indeed, those of us who believe in democracy must always recall that it is the principle of equality, both under the law and over decision-making, that makes democracy the most compelling form of government. Gender equality is thus a prerequisite for genuine democracy. And to make the most of democracy's potential, we must transform cultural norms, political systems, and legal frameworks across society. Because a society that throws obstacle after obstacle in the way of women's political participation is a society that drains the pool of talent it can draw from to solve collective problems. A society that limits the full exercise of political rights by half of its members is a society that puts a cap on its collective aspirations. And by the way, the fact that democracy is so fundamentally premised on equality also makes it essential for the achievement of sustainable development. Our own data at International IDEA show that despite all the remaining shortcomings, only 3% of democracies do really, really poorly on gender equality. For authoritarian regimes, the proportion is 50%. And since we all know that the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals runs through gender equality, democracy hugely improves the likelihood of success in achieving SDGs overall. And this brings me to my call to action. Progress on gender equality to this point has been hard-earned, primarily by women who have shown great courage and creativity to claim their rights. Now, we must leverage these gradual gains into transformative change for equality and democracy. And we must engage the whole of society, women and men, girls and boys, public institutions and private organizations, as advocates and agents of that change. Here we can draw on this cohort's proven ability to generate proposals that garner broad and diverse support. In each of our countries and institutions, we should use the cohort and its recommendations as a catalytic spark for further commitment and action. And we should insist that the time for such commitment and action is now. In the face of continued challenges, in the face of persistent prejudice, in the face of systemic barriers, let us all refuse to wait for gradual trend lines to lead us to a better future. Instead, let us bend the arc of history closer to justice, so that when my daughter is my age, the story of her lifetime is one not just of piecemeal progress towards gender equality and democracy. Her life story should be about the birth of a reconciled humanity where each human being can claim their rightful place under the sun. Thank you.
Well, we thank him for his excellent remarks and for really describing the urgency for accelerating progress in this space. And he will be back with us for the Q&A. So anybody who has questions, think about them now. We're going to turn now to two United States officials who have been leaders on democracy and gender equality. First, we're going to hear from Jamila Biggio, the Senior Coordinator for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment, and the Acting Deputy Assistant Administrator for Gender Equality at the United States International Development Agency, USAID. She has held previous positions in the White House and in the State Department, and she will describe this new network for gender-inclusive democracy that the United States, through AID, is bringing together to accelerate women's political participation, and it is an entry point to advance the recommendations of the cohort that Dr. Casas-Zamora just laid out. Jamila, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Verveer. It is such a pleasure to be here today with you all and an honor to represent USAID among such distinguished speakers and friends and guests today. We're so grateful to the Second Gentleman for lending his voice to this important cause, and to our cohort partners for your leadership throughout this year of action, for your efforts and vision and commitment to lay out a course for us all, to lay out recommendations for how we can all now put the vision and commitment that you've heard into action. At USAID, we fully support the cohort's founding premise that gender equality is a prerequisite for democracy. As we've heard, we know that strong, resilient democracies require the meaningful participation of all members of society. Leaving out half the population results in weaker, less stable, and less innovative democratic movements and innovations. Autocrats know this too, as we've heard, which is why we're seeing them systematically target the rights of women and gender diverse individuals as a conscious tactic to shore up their own political power. We are seeing, as a result, a rollback of women's rights and democratic gains on every continent. This is truly a global threat. And as you've heard, we need a spark of action now to take the commitments that we've made into practice and really help support women's movements, women leaders around the world to realize the opportunity to contribute fully to advancing democracy around the world. We know that when we do this, that we will see stronger democracies. We know that we will see more successful resistance movements. We know that when women participate on the front lines, resistance movements are more likely to secure lasting, peaceful, democratic change. And as we prepare for the Second Summit for Democracy next week, we must underscore at every turn that we together will be more successful when women and girls in all their diversity have the opportunity to contribute. So to that end, we truly welcome the cohort's policy recommendations. We welcome the vision that they're laying out for governments, civil society, private sector, for all of us to collectively take to advance these aims. My USAID colleagues and I salute the intentional approach that the cohort has taken to develop their recommendations, in particular the broad consultations that they held with local and regional stakeholders in all regions. This approach, with thanks to the inspirational Rambudzai and her colleagues at International IDEA, has been critical to ensuring that the voices and priorities of women activists around the world are reflected in the recommendations themselves. On Tuesday, as part of the State Department's hosted Status of Women is the Status of Democracy Day Zero event, you'll hear more from USAID Deputy Administrator Isabel Coleman on the U.S. government's Advancing Women's and Girls' Civic and Political Leadership Initiative, which the Second Gentleman spoke of. We're thrilled that through that we'll be investing $15 million as a starting point in advancing an ecosystem approach in countries around the world. We do so recognizing, as the cohort has done, that we can't simply build the capacity of women leaders and support them to build a pipeline of women who are prepared to take on civic and political roles. We also need to work together to ensure their safe and meaningful participation by addressing, for example, the violence that targets women in politics and public life, including online. As the cohort's recommendations have laid out, the initiative that we will be taking forward recognizes that women's political and economic empowerment go hand in hand, and that women's participation and leadership are equally as important to conflict prevention, peace, and security as to democratic governance. Further, like the cohort, the initiative where we're driving forward recognizes the critical need to secure the commitment of and to mobilize male leaders to work alongside women to champion gender equality. We will need the support of male leaders and allies like those joining us today, and then some, if we're to make real progress in addressing the deep-rooted structural and sociocultural barriers to women's civic and political leadership. By sharing power, we can achieve true democracy. The cohort's policy recommendations and the roadmap that they've laid out provide an excellent jumping-off point for the Network for Gender Inclusive Democracy, which, as the Second Gentleman has indicated, we are pleased to launch next week with a diverse group of multilateral, bilateral, civil society, and academic partners. Together with these partners, we have committed to better align our efforts to advance gender equality and democracy. So together, we can accelerate progress on our Summit for Democracy commitments. And we can, through this network, again, take the spark of the commitments today, of the recommendations laid out by the cohort, and drive these into action. So the Network for Gender Inclusive Democracy will focus on a few specific goals. First, coordination. So many partners are committed to women's leadership, but we miss opportunities to strengthen our impact by working together. So the network will foster sustained and real-time dialogue among partners, both at the headquarters and at the country level, so that we can better align both our diplomatic and our programmatic efforts around the world to advance women's leadership. Second, data and learning. We all want to be more effective in our efforts to advance women's leadership. The network will provide a platform to fast-track our learning by sharing information on what's working and what isn't to promote gender-inclusive democracy and women's political participation and leadership. Third, advocacy. We will join forces to advocate for gender-inclusive democracy at the national, regional, and international levels, and for resource allocations that are commensurate with the importance of this goal. We thus see the Network for Gender Inclusive Democracy as an important vehicle to carry the cohort's work forward, to draw on their recommendations to inform the collective programming and policy efforts that we are committed to undertake. We commit as USAID to do so now as we begin designing the programming under the Advancing Women's and Girls Civic and Political Leadership Initiative. Our focus will be on addressing the individual, the structural, and the sociocultural barriers to women's participation and leadership. We will be in the focus countries identifying what are the barriers there to building the pipeline of women and girl leaders. Starting in schools, what are the opportunities to advance civic education, to create leadership training and mentoring so that we have a cohort of women and girl leaders, building on those that want that seat, that we are standing with them and supporting them at every turn with the resources and support they need to seize those leadership roles. We know that's not enough. We know that when they seize those roles, that they face barriers at every turn. We know that there are political party rules that make it harder for women to run and to win. We know that when women take those leadership roles, that they face an increased attack of targeted harassment, both online and offline, that is intended to push them out of their leadership roles and to send a signal to other women not to take those leadership roles. So we must join forces in countries around the world to stand up against this targeted violence against women in politics and public life, to take down the barriers in the enabling environment for women to be able to succeed at the front lines of resistance movements, in appointed governance positions, in elected political roles, so that we have their true force, their true contributions, and we see a stronger democracy, democratic outcomes because of it. We are committed to this through the initiative that we are rolling out. We are committed with partners through the Network for Gender Inclusive Democracy to join forces so that we can accelerate this progress in countries around the world. And we look forward to the continued partnership. And again, thank the governments of Sweden and Romania, International IDEA, and the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security for your unflagging efforts during this year of action, for the vision that you have laid out, and we commit to taking it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamila, and we will, all of us, look forward to ensuring that what you've laid out becomes reality on the ground where it counts. And now from the State Department, Kat Fotovat, the senior official of the Secretary of State in the Office of Global Women's Issues. She's over 20 years' experience in government advocating for women's rights, human rights globally, and specifically in conflict and conflict-affected states. She will describe the State Department's efforts now to advance the presidential initiatives for democratic reform. Kat.
All right. Good morning, everyone. What an honor to be here today with such distinguished guests and speakers. I want to thank you for just being such gracious hosts here at the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. My mentor, my hero, my friend, Ambassador Verveer. It's really been wonderful to see the cohort and the partnership between the governments of Sweden and Romania, the formidable international idea, and of course, the Second Gentleman. When I told my son this morning I was going to see the Second Gentleman, I said, humble brag, because we always try and speak in hashtags. And then he said, tell him I look forward to when he is the first gentleman, hashtag life goals. I will go back and make sure that he knows that I pass that message along. But great to raise a feminist son, hashtag my life goals. So as we have heard, women's civic and political leadership is crucial and critical to both the functioning of democracies and the success of democratic movements across the globe. And we know women can lead some democratic movements. That is why the Summit for Democracy, President Biden identified gender equality as a prerequisite for democracy, because pluralism cannot exist as long as 50% of the population remains disenfranchised. When women and girls have a distinct and legitimate role in civic and political decision-making at all levels of society, the social well-being of their country improves and prosperity across the board grows. The evidence could not be more clear. That is why Vice President Harris, and we have heard this quote so many times, and I think we should all get T-shirts on it, said the status of women is the status of democracy at the 2021 Commission on the Status of Women. Because there is a direct correlation between women and girls' ability to meaningfully participate in civic and political life and the economic prosperity, health, and innovation in a country. And that is why we recently announced our program, She Wins. I'm going to talk a lot in acronyms, and I will try to explain them to you, but welcome to the U.S. government. We speak in acronyms. So She Wins and She Persists, which are two State Department-led programs as a part of the Presidential Initiative for Democratic Renewal, which were announced at the first Summit for Democracy. These programs each explicitly target the inclusion of women and girls in civic and political life as catalysts for democracy and resilience. Supporting her empowerment, women's inclusion in new security, She Wins, strategically advances the leadership of local women and women-led civil society organizations to address peace and security challenges in their communities and strengthen the leadership of local women through Women, Peace, and Security National Action Plan localized efforts. And already, this is underway in Cameroon, the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Papua New Guinea, Uzbekistan, and Yemen. Additionally, and excitingly, this past November, She Wins launched a rapid response fund to provide agile and easy-to-access funds that support women peace builders to lead on peace and security priority areas in their communities. So it's local and easily accessible. This year, She Wins will be adding an additional $1.7 million to support programming and the expansion of that rapid response fund. So we are listening to the women on the ground who are saying, we need funding and we need it quickly to be able to address the conflicts as they arise. The second initiative launched under the President's Initiative for Democratic Renewal, supporting her empowerment, political engagement, rights, safety, and the inclusion strategies to succeed, or She Persists. Bear with me on these acronyms. It's led by our Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor in very close collaboration with my office. She Persists was launched to support women's political participation and empowerment to build and sustain good governance and lasting democracy globally. This multi-year endeavor provides funding for technical assistance in enabling and advancing women's safety, including and importantly online, political participation and empowerment, and initiatives for inclusive democracy. And we mean inclusive democracy, meaning women in all their diversity, including the development of national action plans for women's political participation, rural and indigenous women's leadership in environment and governance, and small grants to local organizations working to address barriers to women's political and economic participation. We want to meet the women in the localities where they are. Practically, She Persists programming aims to counter violence against women in politics, again, including online harassment and abuse, support marginalized women to lead local, national, and regional rights-based movements, and encourage women in all their diversity to participate fully in democratic processes, especially through support to young and emerging women leaders across the world. The return on investment in both these programs is sure to transcend women's individual well-being and to counter all the democratic backsliding that we have been talking about. We are excited to be featuring gender equality as the central theme for the State Department's side event this next Tuesday on Day Zero for the Summit for Democracy, hosted by the Secretary of State, Secretary Blinken. This event will give governments and implementing partners the stage to share their progress, their gender-related commitments over the last year of action, including related to the Global Partnership for Action on Gender-Based Online Harassment and Abuse, which was also launched at the first summit, and inspire plans and collective efforts for the years ahead. We are so grateful for Ambassador Caltrop's participation and have two panels, stellar change makers lined up, so please, all of you, please join us as well. We will have a link online. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not fail to mention that today marks the 1-year anniversary since the Taliban enacted detrimental edicts prohibiting girls from attending secondary school. In addition to this simply being heartbreaking, UNICEF has predicted this deprivation of education translates to a loss of at least $500 million for the Afghan economy in just the last 12 months, which is a direct correlation between the Taliban's ruthless restrictions on women and the negative impact on any hope for Afghanistan's economic viability. Democratic process and good governance require the participation and voices of all citizens. Any deviations from this render inequitable social policies and unfair political processes. It is in the best interest of government, the private sector, civil society, and you and me to do whatever we can to promote inclusive and unencumbered participation of all people and lift our voices for the women of Afghanistan, the women of my country of birth, Iran, and all those all over the world who cannot lift theirs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kat, especially for reminding us, too, about the terrible anniversary of what's been happening to women in Afghanistan after years of progress, and now they're systematically trying to erase everything they represent. We've been talking a lot in policy speak so far. We're now going to go to what Kat said, the women in the localities, the people on the ground. And it is my pleasure to first introduce Katerina Levchenko, our dear friend, who is currently serving as the government of Ukraine's Commissioner for Gender Equality Policy. She is a human rights activist. She's a politician. She served for years as the president of the International Women's Rights Center, La Strada, Ukraine, fighting human trafficking and other human rights violations, and she's been a parliamentarian. She's coming to us from Kiev. Katerina, we are so pleased to have you with us. Today, Ukraine is fighting, struggling to save its democracy against a massive assault. Let me ask you, as someone who has long been involved, playing a central role in ensuring gender equality, and I might add the women, peace, and security agenda in Ukraine, which has been a priority for the government there. What difference have you seen that women's leadership is playing in upholding Ukraine's democracy, particularly in this moment? And you and your colleagues have recently updated your National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security. Why does that matter? Again, especially now in this struggle. So welcome.
Good morning, dear friends, dear Ambassador Verveer. Thank you very much for your questions, and thank you for including Ukrainian issues in the agenda of this important side event on the eve of the second forum for Democracy, where President Zelensky will participate in. For Ukraine, UN Resolution 1325 is not only a document that actualizes the agenda on women, peace and security. It is an important tool that for ensuring equal rights and equal opportunities for women and men in society in whole, in security and defense sector, and in the process of state recovery, which has been destroyed by war for 9 years. Russian aggression against Ukraine has demonstrated that there is no localized security in modern world, and that security is not just a matter of absence of war. It includes energy, economic, environmental, food, infrastructure, information, transport, and other types of security. Ukrainian government adopted 2 national action plans for the resolution's implementation in 2016 and in 2020, and updated the second plan last year in response to new challenges and security and emerging issues due to full-scale Russian invasion. As already were mentioned, democracy means equal participation of women and men, including representatives of vulnerable groups in decision-making. I repeat again and again that Ukrainian women are active part of Ukrainian society. And despite of wide-scale invasion, the government of Ukraine continued the development of gender equality policy in close cooperation with civil society, first of all, women and feminist organizations. And good examples of such cooperations, besides 1325, the elaboration and adoption of National Gender Equality Strategy until 2030, and Gender Equality Strategy in Education. Last year, Ukraine ratified Istanbul Convention, Council of Europe Convention on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. It was done in close cooperation of the President of Ukraine, government, parliament, and civil society. And the Ukrainian women civil society organizations have been demanding ratification for almost 11 years and have fought with the Russian propaganda against ratification. Women are not just suffering and affected in war, but they are vigorous defenders. More than 60,000 of women are in armed forces, and around 5,000 of them are at the front line. It means that pattern women as victims of war is not relevant in Ukraine. And it's my very strong conclusion. Ukrainian women, government official, MP, volunteer, activists participate in negotiation and discussion at national and international level. You know, we have asked and continue to ask to close the sky, to provide more modern weapons for Ukrainian army, because this is the only way to the peace we seek, which is clearly articulated by the Ukrainian women movement. More and more women have united for advocacy of the women, peace and security agenda at the local level. And currently there are 14 regional coalitions led by Ukrainian Women Fund. Natalka Karbovska is the director of this fund. Women civilians and women from security sector collaborated in the framework of 1325 coalition to develop the initiatives for building and strengthening the security and safety of the local communities. They also organized partnership for prevention and response on the gender-based violence and sexual violence committed by Russian combatants in Ukraine.
Thank you, Katrina, for laying out just how important that is, even to the current crisis, or perhaps I should say especially in the current crisis. We're going to come back to you, but first I want to go to Ikran, who is Ikran Ben Said, who is joining us from Burundi, although she is a Tunisian women's rights activist and founder of Aswat Nisa, a leading NGO working for women's political participation and advocating for gender-sensitive public policies. She founded the NGO when the Tunisian Revolution broke out in 2011, part of the Arab Spring, the first country, to work across party lines and unite women seeking equal political and government participation. Ikran, thank you for being with us. Today, Tunisia's democracy is under great stress. You've long been a tireless advocate yourself for women's political participation, including in building a pipeline for candidates, encouraging women to vote, and so much more. What policies have made a difference, and what kind of pushback is the democratic participation undergoing today in Tunisia?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Ambassador Verveer, for this invitation for a very timely and important conversation right now on democracy, on assault on democracy and women's rights. So yes, exactly. I mean, when we launched Aswat Nisa, I think there were some elements that really facilitated our work, and one of these elements is the general ambiance at that time and the mindset that everybody should and could participate in building our democracy and building our institutions. That translated into a very progressive legal framework. First of all, we had an article in our constitution in 2014 that talks clearly about parity and equality between men and women. And even though that article is really the fruit of the feminist struggle, it also shows the commitment of the state to gender equality and to social transformation through presenting women interests on a local and a national level and all the levels actually. The second thing was the parity in electoral law. I don't know if you noticed here, I'm really speaking in the past tense because we don't have this parity in the electoral law anymore, unfortunately. So in 2011, we had, because of that parity law, we had 30% of the seats in the parliament occupied by women. 2014, it has increased to 33%. When we had the municipal election, 50% was occupied by women. Unfortunately, for the recent we only have 16%. So that means that we lost 50% of women representation in the parliament. And at that time, I mean, we as Aswat Nisa, we had different, let's say, approaches to work within that legal framework. Because yes, we had the legal framework, but we didn't have the right mindset. And we remember that we had a conversation about this because Tunisia at that time, it was a peak of the polarization between secular and Islamists. And one of our approach in Aswat Nisa was having really inclusive approach. And we decided, actually, we take the tough yet smart decision that our space will be a welcoming space for all women. So we reached out to all political parties, from the communists to the Islamist political party, because we really think, and we are very aware about our identity as a feminist progressive group, but also we really believe that all women were oppressed under the Ben Ali regime, and all women deserve equal and full participation despite our different ideologies. And the second thing that we did at that time is kind of feminist or women's solidarity, because we noticed that women in political parties most of the time are isolated and they are not supported by their own political parties and the structures and the legal framework within those political parties. But also we noticed that many women who were running for office, they were running under domestic identity, means the wife of or the daughter of, because that was easy to get the party support. their loyalty was more to the political party, to the women's agenda. So we really needed also to change that. And the third thing that we noticed also that most women who were in political party and active in the public space in general really was urban and middle class, upper middle class women. Most of the time, a little bit disconnected from the realities of marginalized women. So we needed to work with women and to create really a space for dialogue, to expose them to different realities, but also to create this kind of solidarity so we can unpack and deconstruct and unlearn this interiorized misogyny. And we really saw huge transformation when women come together and reflect on many issues. The third thing I think that we adopted was really shifting the conversation from representation to redistribution and accountability. Of course, it's our absolute right as women to be candidate and run for office and to win. And our contribution is extremely important for democracy, of course. But also we are accountable because at certain moments, I mean, democracy has to deliver. So we shifted the conversation to public policy and to what are the needs of the community. And we created the bridge between women on a national level and women on a community level. And we shifted the conversation, as I said, toward public policy. How can we turn grassroots solution into public policy? And there when we saw really the magic and the shift with the women that we supported, and then they won and they are in parliament. And with them, with that network, we passed quite progressive laws. One of them is the gender-sensitive budgeting. The other law is the Law 58, which is the very comprehensive, progressive law against gender-based violence. And even on a local level, we contributed to mainstream gender in municipalities, in very, very conservative communities. We facilitated dialogue between municipalities and police officers to ensure safety and security. So that was our work. This is still our work. Unfortunately, now I think we cannot continue doing what we have been doing in the same pace with the same enthusiasm, because, as I said, I think we are all witnessing the assault on democracy and women's rights. And as I'm speaking right now, there is a woman who is the first woman, a political prisoner. Unfortunately, after the revolution, she's sitting in a jail just because she has a different opinion from our president.
Thank you, Ikram, and for that dose of reality. We're going to turn now to the questions that you might have. I'm going to ask Jamila and Kat to come up on stage, for Katerina and Ikram to stay with us, and for Kevin from IDEA, if you can come back in, and we can take the questions. Who wants to start here? Right there in the middle.
Hi. Hello? Yes, okay. Thank you so much for being here today, both virtually and in person. Hi, my name is Joe Desmond. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a second year in the German and European Studies program here at Georgetown. So a growing body of research supports the argument that greater social inclusion of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people is related to higher levels of economic development and democratic resilience. Conversely, the violation of their rights and the exclusion from participation in society negatively impacts democratic resilience. So my question for all of you virtually and in person is, could you spotlight any specific initiatives in which the gender cohort is involved that promote LGBT inclusion or human rights? Or give any recommendations to civil society partners who could be valuable allies in promoting political participation of LGBT people?
Good, let's take a couple more so that. Go ahead, right here. The microphone, please. Okay, and then we'll move here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Hi, I'm Halima. I'm a first-year Master of Public Policy student here at Georgetown. Thank you so much to all the speakers for all your words of power. My question is about frictions in gender equality considerations. So I wanted to ask the cohort and their partners how they approach gender equality considerations when they may operate in friction and sometimes in opposition to U.S. foreign policy or economic considerations. For instance, economic sanctions in Iran can be detrimental to the goals of fostering gender equality and political participation of women. Thank you.
Okay, and one more.
Thank you for this great event. So radicalization to violence is often fueled by disinformation and increasingly misogyny, twin threats to democracy as well. Can you please speak a little bit about the cohort's commitments to addressing women's peace and security with these threats in mind?
Okay, who wants to start in terms of responses? Okay, Katarina.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. So I'd like to start my response on the first questions about participation of LGBT organization, and will give just one example of very close and strong cooperation between civil society organizations, women's rights organizations, including LGBT organizations and government institutions in Ukraine. This example is promoting ratification of Istanbul Convention, where Ukrainian NGO Insight organized Women March, and they also were initiators of petition to the President of Ukraine on ratification of Istanbul Convention. And I also would like to inform you that the draft law on civilian partnership was registered in Ukrainian parliament, and we expect that this legal act will be successfully supported. Thank you.
Dr. Carlos Mosa, do you want to go next on any of the questions?
Thank you so much. Well, not really. I mean, let me just say that the ethos of the work of the cohort is really to press the message that, and this was mentioned by some of the speakers before, that there's a lot of work that has been done in the context of the cohort and that needs to be done going forward about advocacy. And the message here is simply that the task is not nearly done, that there's a long way to go in terms of achieving equality for women in all spheres, and that this is part of a broader agenda to make sure that all vulnerable groups, that all groups that have been traditionally marginalized from political processes, need to take a central role in this agenda, and that certainly includes LGBTQ plus groups. So in a way, this is the struggle for women's rights is part of a much broader struggle that we need to take forward, because it's merely in its early stages. And I think this ethos is what will keep informing the work of this cohort and the initiatives that are stemming from the work that has been done in this year of action. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ikran, do you want to take on any of these questions?
Yes, I want just to react to about the LGBTQA++ movement, and I want to share with you for example, one of the greatest achievements of the revolution is really the solidarity that has been created between the feminist movement and the queer movement, and how the feminist movement provided a space and a platform also for difficult conversations. The thing is, even now, we are really resisting together this assault on democracy, because we understood very well that autocrats, when they start their cracking down, before even tackling the democratic institution, they're tackling really queer and migrant and women, because they are usually the most oppressed groups. So also we understand that we really need to continue to strategically work together because our freedom is related to our rights, but also is related to our democracy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Kat and Jamila.
Sure. First, I want to thank you so much for the question on LGBTQI plus rights and inclusion. And note that across the board, that is something that when we talk about gender and inclusion and intersectionality, that is fundamental to the policies that we have put forward and all of the strategies that we have built in. I will also note it's essential to have consultations with individuals on the ground and what they need. And this really, the case that we have made across the board is, it's about the effectiveness of what democracy is. So making sure that we are including all populations and looking at that intersectional approach of challenges and discriminatory practices against people, whether it be LGBTQI+, indigenous populations, persons with disabilities. We want to make sure that we are addressing their issues and challenges and meet them where they are and be able to provide them with the resources that they need. So whether it be our Women, Peace, and Security strategy or our gender-based violence strategy or our women's economic security strategy, all those strategies have been done in consultation with all these populations and activists. We've had hundreds and hundreds of consultations, but again, it takes a lot of effort to do that, but it makes all of this much more effective. So I thank you for that question, and I will say that this is a fundamental priority and policy for the Biden-Harris administration, and something that we have seen in the bureaucracy has been felt very clearly, and we provide tools. I think our colleague in Tunisia also brought up gender budgeting. That is something that we're talking to governments all over the world about. What does that mean? How do we, because show me your budget and I'll show you your priorities. Making sure that that is something that we are providing tools such as intersectional gender analysis and how do you do actual budgeting to make sure that populations are being included and how are they being affected. So I thank you for that question, and I think it's just fundamental and something that we look forward to working with the cohort on. Those best practices and sharing are really important. In regard to, I think, some of the tensions discussed and sanctions, I think sanctions are so difficult and sometimes effective and sometimes not effective, but they are a tool. And so we look at tools for how do we address authoritarian regimes. There are often carve-outs for things such as humanitarian assistance, such as COVID. During the COVID times, there were abilities to provide medical support and equipment as needed to various governments, even if we have sanctions against them. So we look at and try on balance to make sure that we are sending messages that we are not supporting regimes that oppress their populations in ways that we can, but at the same time, taking into considerations, when that humanitarian need is there. Syria is also a good example to make sure that we are, addressing those issues. And then I'm trying to think of I should have written them down. Misinformation and conflict. Certainly, that has come out in spades. I will say Ukraine in particular. And one of the things that came out of the Commission on the Status of Women and was very clear was really the commoditization of misogyny. And I kind of came out of the Commission on the Status of Women really fired up and angry. So, we have had years that this has been going on, and there is a complacency among some of the technology companies and firms, and making sure to have a data and accountability and hold people to account, but also not punishing the survivors who have had online harassment and abuse or disinformation thrown at them. And honestly, if I had to warn anybody about anything, this AI, emergence that's coming out right now that we aren't actually addressing much, and is kind of alarming. People need to be talking more about what artificial intelligence is and how it's going to affect all of us, both on the gender side and democracy writ large. So, I think these are things that we are just now really starting to engage on, but are scarily coming at us faster than we even know what to do with. So, a word of warning, I think that is the next big issue that I think we'll be dealing with.
Jamila, the last words.
Thanks. Yes, I'll just build on my colleagues just to add a few pieces. So first, on LGBTQI plus priorities, just to add to what Kat has said, that in addition to the policy commitments that the Biden-Harris administration has made, we also have programming across USAID and the State Department that is investing in advancing the leadership of LGBTQI plus individuals and communities, of addressing the legal barriers that they are facing, of addressing the violence that they face. So we've talked about programming to address online-based harassment and abuse. Some of those programs that we're funding are looking at how that's targeting and being used directly against LGBTQI+ individuals as well. So that, as we talk about the commitments that we're making here to women and girls, that we are highlighting that women and girls in all their diversity, including of the LGBTQI+ community, and so are really looking at taking this lens of understanding what do women and girls of the LGBTQI+ community, what do women and girls of racial ethnic minority communities, women and girls with disabilities, et cetera, that we are looking across communities here and ensuring that the work we're doing is not just reaching the elite, but that we are in the countries and communities we're working, that we are reaching women and girl leaders, LGBTQI+ leaders across communities, across countries, and helping to create pathways to leadership for them all. On building on the question on the risks and the threats of misinformation, this is a priority of the administration. We're joined here, in fact, by my colleague from USAID, Vera Zekum, is here for any questions you all have afterwards. She's leading efforts on digital, on the priorities and the intersection of digital and democracy, digital technology and ecosystems and democracy. Next week at the Summit for Democracy, there will be events focused specifically on the intersection of technology and democracy, with a real focus at what are the risks being posed by malinformation to societies writ large, including to gender equality specifically, and recognizing how misdis and malinformation is being used to target and to undermine gender equality in communities, to target women and girl leaders. And so as we talk about what's needed to advance women's leadership, to advance gender equality as a prerequisite for democracy, we recognize that addressing these issues is a priority. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. We've gone a little over time, which we apologize for, but I hope you found it rich and informative and really heed the call to action. So thanks especially to all of our speakers, to the leaders of the cohort, for the hard work that really is just beginning in many ways, because the work of the cohort has gone now in terms of its laid out proposals, but the hard work is really following up, implementing, enforcing, et cetera. So our program ends, but our work in many ways just begins. I want to thank all of those who helped bring us to this program here at Georgetown, especially to Jess Keller, to Lana Kwan, to Helen Rucker, to Anna Layeva, and to our own Jessica Smith. And for those of you who are here, I regret we can't invite those of you virtually, but we have a reception. Please feel free to stay, and maybe more of your questions can be answered in that forum. So let's go forward. We have a lot of work to do. Let's strengthen democracy. Let's strengthen gender equality. Let's make progress for everyone. Thank you so much.